Hello, my name is Katie. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm here today to do my October wrap-up. Okay, so due to some technical difficulties, I don't have accurate information on the story graph this time around for my stats, so I'm kind of just gonna have to do my own thing here. I was attempting to get the chart that shows format, i.e. physical, ebook, audiobook, whatever, to work. So to do that, I was digging through multiple editions, and somehow with all that, the page count stuff got really messed up. So I'm just gonna insert my own charts and stuff. Okay. So in the month of October, I read 13 books for a total of 5,146 pages. That is 396 pages per book on average. Of those, 6 were slow-paced, 7 were medium-paced, and apparently 0 were fast-paced, which I think I might disagree with, but it's neither here nor there. For page count, I had 2 that were under 300 pages, 9 that were between 300 and 499 pages, and then 2 that were 500 plus. 4 books that were nonfiction, I had 9 that were fiction. 4 of the books I read were physical, 7 were ebook, and 2 were audiobook. And I had an average rating of 4.02 stars. 3 books at 5 stars, 1 at 4.5, 4 at 4 stars, 2 at 3.75, 1 at 3 stars, and 1 at 2.25 stars, and then 1 that I did not rate for reasons that I will get into. Okay, so first up, we're just gonna go in order of star ratings. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 stars. First one, well, technically this is like one of the last books I read. Whatever. Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. A lot of people were telling me that they loved this book. It was their favorite book of the year. They had read other stuff by the author that they hadn't liked, but this really, really got them. And I totally agree. The last Fredrik Backman I tried was, I think it's My Grandmother Told Me to Tell You She's Sorry. And I didn't care for it. I didn't even finish it. This, however, was so compelling. The story itself, I feel like, isn't what is actually great. It's the characters and what you learn about people and your mental health while reading this. I don't know if I'm making any sense here. So this book takes place in, I believe, Sweden, because they mention Stockholmers a lot. And Stockholm's in Sweden, so I'm assuming this takes place in a smaller town in Sweden. And there is this person who attempted to rob a bank, and that did not go well because the bank was a cashless bank. But then the bank robber freaks out and just runs into the nearest building, finds that there's a stairwell and no way to get out, so the bank robber ends up in this apartment that is for sale, and there is a viewing going on. And then this book is also told through interviews that the police are doing with the hostages. I find it difficult to call them hostages when there was really nothing at stake. But anyway, the police are interviewing the hostages, trying to figure out what happened to the bank robber, because the apartment is seemingly empty, and all they have with them are the people who had been held hostage. There was no place for the bank robber to go, yet the bank robber is nowhere to be found. So first of all, I found every single character to be horrible. I hated reading about them. I hated who they were. But as you continue on, you start to learn that first impressions are not always the right impressions, and that frequently people are a lot more than they initially seem. And by the end, I can honestly say that this book was filled with lovable characters. Secondly, it does so much to add to the conversation about mental health, depression, anxiety, suicide, that I couldn't help but give it 5 stars. This was phenomenal. It was funny at times. It was just great. The next 5-star read I had was The Hemingses and Monticello, An American Family by Annette Gordon Reed. Now I know, like, in my Trash My TBR that went up like a week ago, but that was filmed like a month ago, I had said that I probably wouldn't be getting to this anytime soon, but I was so excited about this that I decided to look it up and see if my library had an audiobook copy, because I didn't have an audiobook at the time, and that tends to be how I get through things faster, is I have an audiobook. I can listen to it while I do chores or cooking or whatever, like tasks that don't require any thought. And they had it. So I got it and I consumed it so very quickly. This is a beautifully told story about Sally Hemings and her affair with Thomas Jefferson, but also it tells the story of all the Hemmingses, her siblings, her mother. It really looks at their interactions with other people, not just like the slaveholders, but also other black people in their vicinity, other slaves that they were surrounded by. It discusses how the slave experience was not the same for everybody in a very nuanced way. And it specifically discusses how the Hemmingses were treated differently, partly because of their heritage, the fact that they were mixed race. It also really looks into choice in the context of slavery, whether slaves ever had any choice, whether consent could possibly exist in that world, and I just really loved the conversation. I loved everything about this, to be honest. My final 5-star read, and I'm laughing as I'm saying this because one of my subscribers, her name is also Katie, she did not like this book as much as I did. We read it roughly the same time and she was very disappointed, but I really loved it. And that is The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. It is essentially following this girl, her name is Esme, from a very young child. She has been with her father in a place called the Scriptorium. Her mother has died, her father is pretty much all she has, and he would bring her to work with him as he was working on the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary. She starts collecting words that have been discarded. A lot of the times the reason these words aren't added to the dictionary is that there is not enough written evidence of them being used, or they're considered too lowbrow, and most of the time what she discovers is that the words that aren't considered important are largely used by the poor and women. So she starts collecting these words, and I really just loved following her story. I thought there was a good bit of feminism in here that I enjoyed. It felt true to the times. It really felt like the author could have in fact written a nonfiction book about this, but instead she chose to take all those facts and just weave fictional characters within them. And I really enjoyed the entire experience of reading this. Next up, I had one read that I gave 4.5 stars, and that was The Mercies by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. This book, I barely even know what to say about it. It is based on a true story that happened in the 1600s in Norway. There is this small fishing village that is on an island, and one day when all the men are out fishing, a storm kicks up and kills all the men. So it's basically just women, small boys, and old men in this town. And a few years after the fact, I guess he's some kind of commissioner. Let me see if he actually has the proper title. I assume he does, but I can't find it. Anyway, his name is Absalom. He is sent to kind of take these women in hand, I guess. Recently, the king of Norway has decided that Christianity is the only way to be, and that any other religion must be witchcraft. In order to help him adapt better, he takes a Norwegian bride. Her name is Ursa. She does not know what she's getting herself into. She doesn't even know Absalom, but her father basically says do it, so she does it. She ends up in this very isolated fishing town on this island, very lonely. She misses having her sister with her, and She ends up becoming friends with a woman called Marin. They're about the same age, and Marin has lived on this island her whole life. During the storm, she lost her brother, her father, and the man she was betrothed to. Not too long after Absalom gets there, he begins like a witch hunt, and it culminates in a witch trial, and it's horrifying and just infuriating, but the ending made me happy enough that it was okay, that I managed to get through the rest of it. It was okay. But yeah, I really, it was a hard book to read, but very, very good. Next up, I have some 4-star reads. First of all, I have A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. So I started reading this. I got through like the first chapter or something and put it down. And I was like, I don't know, maybe I'm just not into fantasy anymore. This isn't really getting my attention. I have no real interest in sitting down and reading this, but because I had already started it and it was part of a reading challenge I set for myself, I decided to pick it up one night, and I was like, just get through chapter 2 and see how it's going. I then proceeded to read 100 pages, and it was 1 in the morning, and I was like, oh no, what have I done? This is very, very good. I understand the hype that it was getting. It is, oh man, it's kind of a magical school, but I'm using school very loosely here. It seems that there are no actual adults in this school. It's all like self-study, and it's run by some kind of magic system that keeps the school in existence. And then there are also these maleficent creatures that sneak around the school, and the students have to use their magic to defend themselves. There's a lot that goes into the magic system, which I really appreciated because it had very definite set terms to how it could be used and consequences and things of that nature. I actually really enjoyed the education part of it too, how the school is more or less run. Our main characters are Galadriel and, is it Orion? Yes, it's Orion. And Galadriel's like super cranky, but you end up really feeling for her at the end. Like, she's the best kind of cranky protagonist. I ended up really rooting for her and Orion. Orion is like the golden boy. He comes from this very prestigious enclave in New York, and he seems to be the hero that nobody actually wants, specifically not Galadriel. But he won't leave her alone. He just keeps saving her life. And it's funny. I really like their banter. I want to read the sequel so badly, but I'm on hold at the library for, I think I have like another 8 weeks for my copy. Ugh. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. And the next book I gave 4 stars to, The Family Plot by Megan Collins. I barely remember anything about this book now. Oh wait, yes I do. Okay, here we go. So this is a thriller, and it's one of those situations where there's a big family house at the center of it. So our main character Dahlia has returned to the home after something like a decade. Her brother had gone missing when he was 16 years old, and everyone just assumed he ran away, and she's been looking for him ever since. When she returns to the home, she's there to bury her father. They open up his burial plot and find the remains of Dahlia's twin brother. And this is largely a story of trying to figure out who killed Andy. But there is also a serial killer that's been running around on the island for, I don't know, 20 plus years. And there is discussion as to whether or not the serial killer also killed Andy. It was pretty good. At this point, I don't remember the complaints that I had. I think it was maybe along the lines of I didn't like the pacing of it. And then the ending, it was like very obvious. It was one of those things where it was like, obviously that's what's happening. But the overall experience of reading it was very good. Okay, my next 4-star read was My Monticello by Jocelyn Nicole Johnson. This is I guess it's a collection of short stories, but the first two stories are very short, and they take up maybe a third of the book, and then the last story takes up the last 2/3. I don't typically care for short story collections. I'm very selective when it comes to what I like and what I don't like. In this case, I really, really liked the third story, and I was okay with the first two. I'm going to be totally honest with you right now. I only remember 2 of them. I remember the very first one, which had a lot to do with a college professor essentially having a child so that he could control all the things in his environment around him and raise him up to be exactly what society deems a good person is, and then see how this son's life as a black man compares to that of a white man. This was a little bit intense. Let me just tell you that this is all very speculative. It actually feels slightly dystopian in places, but not so far in the future that it doesn't seem possible. The second story, like I said, I don't remember at all. And then the third story involves a descendant of Sally Hemings from, the My Monticello book that we discussed earlier. And their life, well, the life of her and everyone around her changes because the power grid goes down and life is essentially tossed into chaos, and there is a raid on this small, it's like an impoverished community. It's government housing, basically. Mainly black people live there, but there are a few white people living there. And she manages to get a bunch of them out, and for some reason takes them up to Monticello. She's not sure why that is her destination, but it's what she chooses to do. And we get to hear a lot of the discussions about race, obviously. Throwing a little bit of complication into this is that she has a white boyfriend who ends up going with them. And she gets very torn because in a world that is so torn apart by racism, she doesn't know how to feel about this white man that she really cares for, that she loves. And I thought that was so impactful. As someone who myself is in a mixed race relationship, there were a lot of things she was saying that I could relate to, but also things that I had never considered given that I am the white partner. And I just thought it was so interesting to read about feelings surrounding that and the complications it can bring to someone's life and how it impacts who they think they are as a person. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but I really enjoyed that story. It took me through a range of emotions. But yeah, really, really good overall. My next 4-star read, The Secret Rooms, A True Gothic Mystery by Catherine Bailey. This was phenomenal. The reason it got 4 stars instead of 5 was that there was like a pacing issue. Sometimes it just got really boring. But for the most part, it was super interesting. This is about I believe he's the 9th Duke of Rutland? Anyway, actual real person, and this is nonfiction, so it's a totally true story. And she went to his like manor home or whatever. Now this man is dead. She's a few generations down is who she was discussing writing this book with. And the reason she was allowed to come and look in their family archives was because she was writing a book on World War I, and she knew the family had information there because they had actually stockpiled a bunch of old records and stuff from the government in their house while the war was happening, just to keep them safe. So she knew they had records about various things there, and that's what she was looking for. But while she was going through the various correspondence and documents, she noticed that someone had completely excised 3 separate portions of the 9th Duke of Rutland's life. And she determined that it was him because one of his tasks that he took on before he died was to compile the family archives and to put everything in order. And he actually died in that room while he was trying desperately to finish his project. And she determines that cutting all this out must have been what he was doing. And so she needed to figure out why. What was he trying to hide? So basically her book turned into what was going on with this man, what happened in his life that he wanted to hide these 3 separate periods so badly. And so she decides she's going to figure it out, and she does a lot of impeccable research and really manages to get to the bottom of most everything. Now there are some things we'll never know simply because nobody that's alive right now was there at the time to tell us, and a lot of stuff was missing. So a lot has to be kind of deduced from other things or found in other records in other places. And this author just went for it. Like, I don't even know how much time she spent contacting other families and government officials trying to get access to various records, but she did it, and it was so interesting. There were times when I was just riveted and like on the edge of my seat. It was very, very good. Highly recommend it. Okay, my 3.75 star reads. I have 2. First is Matrix by Lauren Groff. This I enjoyed, but it kind of, so there was a review that I read, and they didn't care for this book. And they said it was because, I don't remember the exact wording, but basically it was that it kind of felt like the Sparks Notes version of the novel, not a novel itself. And I do understand that. I do, because it's a very short book, and it does feel like we just skip years sometimes, like chunks of time just disappear. And it's like, what happened? Our main character, Marie, is living in the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine. She is married to King Henry at this point. Marie is actually Henry's half-sister, but they don't like to treat her as such for obvious reasons. But then also she's just very tall. She doesn't look very feminine. She's not super courtly in her appearance. She seems rough-hewn, and she doesn't quite fit in. Her mother has died. There's absolutely no one to protect her anymore. So Queen Eleanor more or less casts her off and sends her to live and be prioress at this abbey that she wants nothing to do with. But she does end up turning things around, and she more or less decides to make it her mission to improve this abbey, to make the nuns' lives better. She sees a lot of mismanagement happening, and she takes it in hand and turns things around. There's a lot of things that I found odd in this. I'm not even sure how much I should go into it, because it's so short, I don't really want to give spoilers, but let's just say I enjoyed it fine enough. It was better than mediocre. The other book that I rated 3.75 stars was The Last Garden in England by Julia Kelly. This is a book that I have been wanting to read since I saw it in one of my new book releases. It is essentially a person in present day trying to solve a historical mystery, more or less. So in present day, our main character, Emma, she designs gardens, but she prefers to try and take them back to their historical roots. So if she's just designing a new garden for someone, fine. But when she is trying to revive an old garden, she wants to keep it as close to the original work as possible. She gets hired to do this at this amazing home that has an incredible heritage. It had a garden that was designed by a very famous garden designer who actually designed it before she became super famous. And Emma is trying desperately to find notes or maps or some kind of plans so she can determine what the original garden had looked like. Now there are several different timelines here. We have the point of view of the original garden designer, and then we have a couple points of view during World War II. We have the woman of the house, and then we also have a girl named Beth. She becomes part of like a land army. Basically, she signed up to serve in the war, but in the capacity of working on farms. because so many young men had abandoned their positions on these farms to sign up and go to war, that they didn't have enough people to actually help bring in the crops to feed everybody. So that's what she's doing. So it's just very interesting. My problem was I didn't think we needed so many points of view. I just don't know why they were actually necessary. I could have done with one less. Okay, 3-star read. I have King, Kaiser, Czar, 3 royal cousins who led the world to war by Katrine Clay. I don't really know what to say about this, other than a lot of the times I was extremely bored. I didn't care for the way it was organized. The organization left me very confused most of the time. Each chapter, instead of just talking about either the king, Kaiser, or the Tsar, it would compile all of them, but with no real delineation. So in one paragraph, we'll be talking about King George or his childhood or whatever, but then the next paragraph would jump to what the Tsar was doing at that time. And it left me like with whiplash, going back and forth all the time. And then on top of that, these are 3 very prominent men of their day. So we get them, but we also get information on their parents and their grandparents and their siblings. But then we also they also talk about their advisors. So there's just so many people, so many names running through this book all the time. And I'm like, I don't even know who anyone is anymore. Like, it just got so confusing. So my personal recommendation here is just to suck it up and read a book on all 3 of these men, rather than trying to do this, because I'm not really sure I have any better understanding about how their relationships led to World War I than I did before I read this. So this is one I think you can skip. Was it terrible? No. But I don't think you'll get very much value out of it. I think you'd get more out of just reading a book on each of these individual people. Okay, and then I had a book I rated 2.25 stars, The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. I was disappointed. If you've been around for a while, you know I like gothic books, and that's what I was hoping I was going to get here. It is basically the story of Jane. She is, I think, like 30, and she's been living with her caregivers. It's people that she went to live with after her parents died in this war, and they're moving, and she doesn't want to move with them. She decides she needs to marry, so she comes up with this proposition to marry not for love but for business. And she makes a list, and at the top of that list is a doctor, and he agrees to do this marriage thing. And his one caveat is that she cannot stay the night in his family home. She will live at the surgery, the clinic, whatever you want to call it, and he will sleep at his family manor, and then they will be together during the day. She thinks this is very odd, but agrees. On their wedding night, however, they inadvertently end up at the family home, which was not supposed to happen, and upon arrival, there is a storm that basically strands Jane at the house. So, why I didn't like this book? First of all, I'm going to go ahead and call it fantasy. I'm not going to call it gothic. I'm not going to call it horror. I'm going to call it fantasy. It takes place in a world that is clearly supposed to be Victorian Britain. However, it is supposed to also happen post a war that very much sounds like World War I. Now, they live in Great Britain, and the war was against Ruska, and there were gas attacks. Look. It is what it is. What it really feels like is that this author didn't want to actually have to do much in the way of research, so she decided to set it in a fantasy world. Aside from that, this is less of a gothic ghost story than it is a story about black magic. I don't know. It didn't give me atmosphere. It didn't give me anything other than like disgust, to be honest. There are some very graphic scenes in it, which I didn't care for. It's to me it's not scary. It's more just disgusting. So her husband's a doctor, right? And I just thought it was weird how they would pick and choose which strange ailments were the result of magic and which were just natural. So like an ectopic pregnancy happened and she was like, oh, is this because of magic? And he's like, no, this just happens sometimes. But then there were like 2 or 3 other occurrences where he was like, oh no, this is magic. Even though like I know full well that those are things that happen to people that aren't the result of magic. It felt very odd. I didn't like it. I wouldn't recommend it. The absolute only reason I gave it 2.25 stars was that the beginning third I enjoyed, and I initially liked that Jane was a strong and independent woman. She's very mathematically minded, and she has always tried to educate herself. But then she starts using math and mathematical properties and proofs to justify magic's existence, and then she kind of lost me. So that's that. Okay, the last book I read I didn't rate for reasons. Okay, that was $14.91. That was $14.91. New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus by Charles C. Mann. I enjoyed this, but I did not rate it because I listened to it on audiobook, and I don't think that was the way to go with this one. Because it is subject matter that I'm not terribly familiar with. A lot of the names didn't mean much to me, and therefore I had trouble tracking who we were talking about when. I think if I had been able to see it, like by physically reading it, I would have been able to track the various people easier. And not even just people, but places. So I couldn't rate it because I don't feel like I totally took as much away from it as I would have had I chose to read it physically. So I may put this one on my Christmas wish list to have a physical copy of and try it again that way. I do think it's good. I can't rate it because I don't know what I would rate it. Like if I had fully comprehended and understood things, I may have given it 5 stars. But because I didn't, I don't know what to do, and it's my fault. It's not the book's fault. So that's why I didn't rate this one, and because of that I don't have a ton to say about it either. If you were considering reading this, I would not discourage you. I would just say that if you are not very familiar with the Americas pre-Columbus, or even after that, maybe read it physically, because you might have a hard time like I did with the unfamiliar words. Okay, and that is my October wrap-up. That took far longer than I had intended it to. But it won't be that long for you because I'm going to edit out all the bullshit. Okay, let me know what you read in October, anything that you really loved or really hated. I love to hear all the things. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.